My sister announced she was pregnant with my fiancé's baby at our engagement party. My parents begged me to forgive her. I smiled, walked out calmly, and executed my revenge plan. The DNA test results changed everything. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. It all started on what was supposed to be the happiest night of my life. The air in our backyard was thick with the sweet scent of late summer roses and the low hum of happy chatter. Twinkling fairy lights were strung between the old oak trees, casting a warm, golden glow over everything, making it feel like we were inside a snow globe filled with perfect, shimmering moments. My fiancé, Walter, had his arm wrapped securely around my waist. Every now and then, he'd lean in and whisper something in my ear that would make me laugh, a private little joke in a sea of public celebration. This was our engagement party. My name is Meredith, and for all of my 28 years, this was the moment I had been working towards, a life filled with love, stability, and the quiet comfort of knowing exactly where you belonged. Walter was everything I thought I wanted. He was handsome in that sturdy, reliable way, with kind eyes and a smile that always reached them. We'd met through mutual friends a few years back, and our relationship had been a slow, comfortable build. There were no grand, dramatic gestures, just a steady accumulation of shared moments, cooking dinner together on rainy Tuesdays, long drives with no destination, the easy silence of reading side by side in bed. He was my rock. He was my future. And tonight, surrounded by everyone we loved, we were celebrating the start of that future. My parents were beaming, moving through the crowd with plates of appetizers, their faces lit with pride. My mother had outdone herself, as usual. Every detail was perfect, from the linen tablecloths to the curated playlist of soft jazz filtering through the speakers. I saw my younger sister, Beverly, circulating near the punch bowl. She was wearing a vibrant blue dress that stood out against the muted evening colors. She caught my eye and gave me a small, tight smile before turning away. That was typical Beverly. We were sisters, but we were worlds apart. I was the planner, the responsible one. Beverly was a storm. A beautiful, chaotic storm that often left a trail of destruction in her wake, destruction that I, or our parents, usually had to clean up. But tonight, I chose to ignore the familiar flicker of unease her presence always brought. Tonight was about happiness. It was about Walter and me. As he pulled me onto the makeshift dance floor for a slow dance, I rested my head on his chest, closed my eyes, and just breathed it all in. This was it. This was my perfect life, finally taking shape. Everything was exactly as it was meant to be. Or so I thought. The music faded, and my father tapped his spoon against his glass, calling for everyone's attention. He was about to give a toast. Walter squeezed my hand, his palm warm and a little sweaty against mine. I was looking at my dad, a proud smile already forming on my face in anticipation of his words, when another voice cut through the air. It was sharp, loud, and trembling with a kind of performative drama that I knew all too well. I have something to say. It was Beverly. All heads turned towards her. The cheerful murmur of the party died instantly, replaced by a thick, expectant silence. She was standing near the center of the lawn, the blue of her dress looking almost electric under the fairy lights. She had one hand placed deliberately, almost possessively, on her stomach. Time seemed to slow down. I could feel the individual beats of my heart thudding in my chest, a sudden, heavy drum against the silence. Walter went rigid beside me. His grip on my waist, which had been so firm and reassuring moments before, loosened. I saw his face. All the color had drained from it, leaving behind a pale, waxy mask of shock. Beverly took a deep, shaky breath, making sure she had captured every single person's undivided attention. Tears were already welling in her eyes, shimmering under the lights as if on cue. Then, she delivered the line that would shatter my entire world. "I'm pregnant," she announced, her voice cracking for effect. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck the very air from the yard. But she wasn't done. She looked directly at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of tears and something else, something that looked unnervingly like triumph. "And it's Walter's baby." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't just quiet, it was a heavy, suffocating void. My champagne glass was still in my hand, and I remember staring at the tiny bubbles rising to the surface, thinking how strange it was that such small, insignificant things could continue to move when my entire world had just frozen solid. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me. They were waiting for a reaction. They were waiting for me to scream, to cry, to collapse. But I didn't. Beverly, sensing her audience, pressed on, the tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "It's been happening for months," she sobbed, turning her gaze to Walter, who looked like he was about to be sick. "We never wanted to hurt you, Meredith. We tried to stop it, but we're in love." She finally collapsed into a heap of dramatic sobs, conveniently right next to where my parents were standing. In that moment, watching my sister cry and my fiancé look at her with a horrified, guilty expression, I watched my perfect life fall apart, piece by glittering, fraudulent piece. The fairy lights no longer looked magical. They looked like they were mocking me. My mother was the first to move. She rushed to Beverly's side, wrapping her arms around her, cooing words of comfort. My father followed, his face a grim mask of concern. But his concern, I noted with a cold, familiar ache, was directed entirely at Beverly. Not once did either of them look at me. Not once did they check to see if the daughter whose engagement party had just been publicly detonated was still breathing. "Oh, Beverly, my poor baby," my mother murmured, stroking her hair. People started whispering. I could feel their pity and their morbid curiosity washing over me in waves. They were staring at me, the woman scorned, the tragic figure in this sudden, salacious play. "Meredith, sweetheart," my mom said, finally turning to me, her voice gentle but firm, the same tone she always used when she was about to ask me to make a sacrifice for Beverly. "We need to go inside. We need to talk about this as a family. Clearly, Beverly is going through a very difficult time." Of course she was. Beverly was always going through a difficult time. A few years ago, she went through a difficult time and accidentally maxed out my credit card on a spontaneous trip to Miami. I remembered the tense phone call, her crying about how stressed she was, and my mother telling me, "Just pay it off for now, honey. We don't want to add to her anxiety." I ended up taking extra shifts for months to cover that debt. Then there was the time she went through a difficult time and crashed my car, the one I had saved for 2 years to buy. She'd taken it without asking. The excuse was another boy who had broken her heart. I got the car back with a crumpled fender and a cracked windshield. My parents' solution? "She feels terrible about it, Meredith. Let's not make a big deal of it. She's your sister." I drove that car with a spiderweb crack in my line of sight for a year because I couldn't afford the deductible on the insurance claim. Every single time, I was the one expected to understand, to forgive, to absorb the consequences of her chaos. My dad stepped forward now, his voice low. "She's your sister, Meredith." He said it like that explained everything. Like that single fact erased all betrayals. Beverly was now crying into Walter's chest. My fiancé. The man I had shared my dreams with, my fears with, my bed with. And he was holding her, his hands awkwardly patting her back as she sobbed. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not in a loud, explosive way, but in a quiet, decisive click. I calmly placed my untouched champagne glass on a nearby table. "Excuse me," I said, my voice even and steady, cutting through the thick atmosphere of drama. And I turned and walked toward the house. "Meredith, wait!" My mom's voice was sharp with alarm. She followed me into the brightly lit kitchen, which felt cold and sterile after the chaos outside. "You can't just leave. You need to hear her out. Amanda is pregnant. This changes everything." I turned to face her, looking her directly in the eye. "You're right," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "It does." A wave of relief washed over her face. She thought I understood. She thought I was about to fold, like I always did. "Good," she sighed. "Then you understand. We need to support Beverly. She's so fragile." I almost laughed. Even now, after a betrayal this monumental, her only concern was for Beverly's fragility. "Oh, I understand," I said, my eyes scanning the counter until I saw them. My car keys. I picked them up, the cool metal a comforting weight in my hand. Panic flared in her eyes. "Where are you going?" "We need to sort this out." "There's nothing to sort out," I replied, walking towards the back door. "Beverly has you. She always has." And with that, I walked out into the cool night air, leaving my party, my fiancé, and my family behind. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. The drive was a blur. Streetlights smeared across my windshield like wet paint. I had the radio on, but I couldn't hear the music over the roaring in my own ears. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I wasn't driving aimlessly, though. I knew exactly where I was going. There was only one place I could go. My grandmother's cottage by the lake, the one she'd left to me. It was my sanctuary, an hour away from the city and a million miles away from the life that had just imploded. As the miles passed, the initial shock began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Here's the thing they didn't know. Here's the secret I had been holding close to my chest for weeks. I wasn't entirely surprised. Devastated, yes. Humiliated, absolutely. But surprised? Not really. The truth is, I had suspected something was wrong for months. It started with small things, little dissonant notes in the symphony of my perfect life. Walter suddenly becoming secretive with his phone, angling it away from me whenever a text came in. The flimsy excuses for working late, a big project, a deadline moved up, that didn't quite add up. Then there were the unexplained meetings he had to take on weekends, the ones he was always vague about. At the same time, Beverly started having her sudden illnesses. She'd call me, her voice weak and pathetic, canceling our weekly sister lunch because she had a terrible migraine or a stomach bug. It happened so often it became a pattern. A pattern that, I started to notice, often coincided with Walter's mysterious weekend work emergencies. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Insecure. But my grandmother, a woman as sharp as a tack until the day she passed, had always told me, "Meredith, trust your gut. It knows things your head hasn't figured out yet." So, I started paying attention. And I didn't just pay attention, I started preparing. 2 weeks ago, after seeing a charge on our shared credit card statement for a hotel bar across town, a place Walter had no reason to be, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. He was a quiet, unassuming man who promised discretion. 1 week ago, after the investigator's initial report confirmed my fears, photos of Walter and Beverly meeting at that very hotel, I went to the bank. I opened a new, private account. I also rented a safety deposit box and, over the course of 3 days, I quietly moved my important belongings into it, my grandmother's jewelry, my birth certificate, the deed to the cottage, all my personal financial documents. 3 days ago, I logged into our joint savings account, the one we were using to save for our wedding and a down payment on a house, and I systematically began transferring my half of the funds, every penny I had personally contributed, into my new private account. And then, yesterday, I played my final card. I came to Walter with a serious look on my face. I told him I'd been reading about life insurance policies, about how it was a smart thing for an engaged couple to do. Some of the best policies require a full medical workup, including genetic markers, to get the lowest premium, I said, feigning innocence. It would save us a lot of money in the long run. Let's just go get it done. He bought it completely, eager to be seen as the responsible, forward-thinking fiancé. We went to a private lab that afternoon. He thought he was taking a DNA test for an insurance discount. He had no idea he was handing me the weapon I would need to dismantle his lies. So no, as I pulled into the gravel driveway of the cottage and the familiar scent of pine filled the air, I wasn't just a victim running away. I was a hunter who had been patiently tracking her prey. And tonight, they had walked right into my trap. The cottage was dark and smelled faintly of dust and old wood. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I walked straight through the familiar living room to the screened-in porch overlooking the lake. The moon was high, casting a silver path across the still, black water. For a few minutes, I just sat there on the old wicker swing, listening to the crickets and the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. My phone, which I had tossed onto the cushion beside me, had been buzzing incessantly since I'd left. A relentless flood of messages from Walter, Beverly, and my parents. I ignored them all. They could wait. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the one person I knew would understand, the one person who had never been fooled by Beverly's innocent act. My Aunt Lorraine. She was my mother's younger sister, but they were nothing alike. Where my mom was soft and conflict avoidant, Aunt Lorraine was sharp, witty, and had a built-in lie detector that was second to none. She answered on the second ring. "Well, I see little Beverly decided to put on a show tonight," she said, her voice dry as a bone. There was no pity in it, only a weary resignation. Saw it all on Facebook Live. Your cousin Susan couldn't resist. She says she's pregnant, I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. So she says, Lorraine replied, a world of skepticism packed into those 3 words. But you didn't call me just to cry about it, did you, kiddo? That's not your style. She was right. I sat up a little straighter on the swing, the chains creaking softly. No, I said, a new resolve hardening my voice. I didn't. I need your help. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then I heard the unmistakable sound of a cork popping. Does this help involve making Beverly and that spineless fiancé of yours regret the day they were born? A small, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time that night. It might. I'm in, she said without a second of hesitation. My calendar is wide open. What's the plan? First, I said, feeling a surge of strength, we wait for the DNA results to come in. And then we show them what real family loyalty looks like. After we hung up, I felt a profound sense of calm settle over me. My family probably thought I was holed up somewhere, sobbing my heart out, just waiting for the right moment to come crawling back and forgive them, as I always had. They thought they knew me, Meredith, the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who always put the family first. But they had forgotten one crucial detail. I was also my grandmother's granddaughter. And she had taught me that sometimes, the quiet ones are the most dangerous ones of all. I went inside and found what I was looking for on the dusty bookshelf, her old journal, bound in worn leather. I opened it to a page I had marked long ago, her elegant script filling the page. Sometimes, my dearest, she had written, the best revenge is not a loud explosion, but a quiet, creeping frost. Let people think they've won. Let them celebrate on the battlefield until they realize, too late, that they've lost everything of value. I smiled. Beverly had chosen her moment to try and ruin my life. Now, it was my turn to choose the moment to reveal the truth. And it was going to be a moment she would never forget. The next 2 months were a masterclass in patience. I stayed at the cottage, creating a quiet new routine for myself. I'd wake up early, make coffee, and watch the mist burn off the lake. I took long walks in the woods, the crunch of leaves under my boots a steady rhythm against the turmoil in my mind. From a distance, I watched as Beverly and Walter played the happy, expectant couple, a role they slipped into with sickening ease. My parents, of course, were their biggest supporters, orchestrating the entire narrative. Aunt Lorraine was my lifeline, my source of intel from the front lines. She'd call me every few days with updates. Your mother is telling everyone you had a complete nervous breakdown, she told me one morning, her voice laced with disgust. She's spinning this tale about how the pressure of the wedding was just too much for your fragile nerves. Beverly, naturally, is being painted as the selfless, caring sister who is stepping in to support poor, abandoned Walter during his time of need while you recover. I just stirred my coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the ceramic. What else? They're having another engagement party next week, Lorraine said. I could practically hear her rolling her eyes through the phone. At the country club. Your mother is calling it a celebration of new beginnings. It's like she's trying to erase you, Meredith. Pretending you never existed. That was my mother's specialty, rewriting history to fit her preferred narrative. In this version, I was the unstable, hysterical one, and Beverly was the saint, the responsible sister bravely creating a happy new family from the ashes of my collapse. It was a lie so audacious it was almost impressive. During this time, I wasn't just sitting idle. I was working. I had my lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Albright whom my grandmother had always trusted, quietly begin the process of legally separating all my assets. I closed the last of the joint accounts. I changed my will. I put the cottage into a trust that no one but me could touch. I was building a fortress, brick by methodical brick. Sometimes, the isolation at the cottage would press in on me. One rainy afternoon, I was sorting through a box of old photos when I found one of myself and Beverly as kids. We were maybe 7 and 5, sitting on this very porch, sharing a popsicle, our heads bent close together. A wave of grief washed over me, so sharp and sudden it knocked the wind out of me. It wasn't just grief for the sister I thought I had, but for the sister I never really had at all. I let myself cry then, a raw, ugly sob for the little girl in the photo who had no idea what was coming. But then I'd get another update from Lorraine. Beverly had moved into my old apartment, the one I had shared with Walter. She was posting pictures on social media of her redecorating my living room, my kitchen. She posted a picture of her wearing my favorite sweater, a cozy cashmere turtleneck I'd left behind, with the caption, "Feeling so snugly in our new home." The grief would vanish, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard resolve. They thought they were winning. Let them. Their celebration would make their fall all the more spectacular. A week before the new engagement party, a thick manila envelope arrived by courier. It was the final report from the private investigator. I took it out to the porch, sat down at the small wicker table, and opened it with steady hands. The contents were even more damning than I had anticipated. It was all there, laid out in cold, hard facts. Hotel security footage of Beverly and Walter checking in, their faces clear as day. Time-stamped photos of them meeting in discreet corners of parks and coffee shops. Credit card statements detailing their clandestine lunches and hotel room service bills, all charged to a card my father was paying off. That discovery was a particularly bitter pill to swallow. It meant he wasn't just enabling her, he was actively funding her affair. He might not have known all the details, but he knew enough not to ask questions. But the real bombshell, the piece of evidence that would change everything, was tucked into a separate, sealed sleeve at the back of the report. It was a copy of Beverly's medical records, which the investigator had obtained legally through a source. I spread the pages out on the table, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. It was all there. Dates, times, procedures. 3 months ago, right after Walter and I had announced our engagement, Beverly had begun a series of fertility treatments. But the records weren't from a sperm bank. They were from a private clinic, and the file clearly listed the name of the sperm donor, Clayton. Her on-again, off-again ex-boyfriend. The one she had tearfully told us she was done with for good 6 months prior. The timeline was perfect. She had gotten pregnant with Clayton's baby right after my engagement announcement. And according to the investigator's notes, Clayton had packed his bags and moved to another state just a few weeks after the procedure, leaving Beverly high and dry. I leaned back in my chair, the papers rustling in the slight breeze from the lake. It wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated, premeditated plan. She had found herself pregnant and alone, and instead of taking responsibility, she saw an opportunity. She saw my happiness, my stable fiancé with a good salary, my perfect future, and she decided she would just take it for herself. She had weaponized a baby to steal my life. "Are you sure about this, Meredith?" Aunt Lorraine had asked me over the phone the night before, her voice tinged with concern. "Once you do this, there's no going back. Your relationship with your parents." That relationship was over the moment they chose her lies over me, I had said, my voice firm. They made their choice. Now I'm making mine. As I sat there with the proof in my hands, a profound sense of calm washed over me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming the truth. And I had everything I needed to do it. The night of the party arrived, crisp and clear. As I got ready, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were preparing an actress for a role. I chose my outfit with care, a simple, elegant black dress. It was a power dress, not a morning dress. I did my makeup meticulously, a calm, focused ritual. When I looked in the mirror, the woman staring back at me was someone I barely recognized. The soft edges were gone, replaced by a cool, polished composure. There was a fire in her eyes that had not been there before. Aunt Lorraine picked me up. She was also dressed to the nines, in a sharp, tailored pantsuit, looking more like a high-powered lawyer than a guest at a party. She gave me a once-over as I slid into the passenger seat. "Well," she said with a wry smile, "nobody can accuse you of looking like you've had a nervous breakdown." The drive to the country club was mostly silent. We didn't need to talk. We both knew the plan. We were a two-woman army on a mission. As we pulled into the long, winding driveway, I could see the clubhouse up ahead, blazing with light. Music and the sound of laughter drifted out through the open doors. It was a perfect picture of celebration, a beautiful lie painted over a rotten canvas. We parked and walked towards the entrance, our heels clicking in unison on the stone walkway. My heart was beating a steady, determined rhythm. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. Even from the foyer, I could hear them. Beverly's high-pitched, affected laugh rang out above the din. Then I heard my mother's voice, loud and proud, and "I'd like to propose a toast to my wonderful, expecting daughter, Beverly, and my dear future son-in-law, Walter." A smattering of applause followed. Lorraine and I exchanged a look. Our timing was perfect. We stepped into the ballroom. The effect was immediate. A ripple of silence spread out from the doorway as people saw me. Conversations faltered and died. Heads turned. The smiles on my parents' faces froze and then curdled. Beverly, who had been glowing in the center of the room, hand on her belly, saw me, and the color drained from her face. Walter just stared, his mouth slightly agape, looking like a deer caught in the headlights. The room was silent. 100 pairs of eyes were fixed on me. My mother recovered first, forcing a brittle smile onto her face as she hurried towards me. "Meredith," she hissed, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "What are you doing here? This is a private party." I met her gaze without flinching. "I won't stay long," I said, my voice calm and clear, easily carrying in the silent room. "I just came to share some." Beverly, flanked by my father, pushed her way through the stunned crowd towards me. She had regained some of her composure, arranging her features into a mask of wounded indignation. "Haven't you caused enough drama, Meredith?" she said, her hand protectively cradling her growing belly. It was a gesture designed to elicit sympathy, to cast her as the fragile, pregnant victim. "We're trying to celebrate our new beginning." I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach my eyes. I thought of my grandmother's advice. Let them think they've won. "Oh, I know," I said sweetly. "And I'm so happy for you. That's why I brought a gift." From my small, black clutch, I pulled out a crisp, white envelope. I held it up for all to see. It's for Walter, actually, I said, my eyes locking with his across the room. He was still standing frozen, looking pale and sick. He took a hesitant step forward. What is that? You could call it an insurance policy update, I said. You know, from that medical test we took? The results came in. Walter went from pale to ghostly white. That was for an insurance application, he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. It's private. I turned my most charming smile on my mother. Oh, but family matters should be discussed openly, shouldn't they? I believe that's what you always say. Right, Mom? My mother's face was a thundercloud. My father stepped in, his voice booming with forced authority. That's enough, Meredith. You're making a scene. You need to leave. Now. No, I said, my voice dropping but losing none of its carrying power. It was amazing how quiet the room had become. You could have heard a pin drop. Beverly made a scene at my engagement party. I'm just finishing it. I turned my attention back to the envelope in my hand. With deliberate, unhurried movements, I slipped my finger under the seal and tore it open. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. I pulled out the single sheet of paper inside, letting the envelope flutter to the floor. I didn't even need to read it, I had already memorized the single, crucial line. I looked at Beverly, whose eyes were wide with a dawning horror. I looked at Walter, who was trembling slightly. I let the silence stretch, letting the tension build until it was a tangible thing, a thick, crackling presence in the air. These results, I announced, my voice ringing with clarity, show something very, very interesting. Something that makes it biologically, scientifically, and 100% impossible for you, Walter, to be the father of Beverly's baby. A collective gasp went through the room. It was a wave of sound, of shock and disbelief. Beverly swayed on her feet, her face ashen. Behind her, Walter's expression shifted from confusion to shock, and then, as the full implication of my words hit him, to a dark, building fury. This was the first blow. The foundation of their lies had just been shattered. You're lying, Beverly whispered, the words barely audible. It was a weak, desperate defense, and everyone knew it. Oh, honey, I said, my voice dripping with false sympathy. Science doesn't lie. But you do. You lie about everything, don't you? About the pregnancy, about Walter, about everything. I let my gaze sweep over the crowd, then land back on her. Everyone was leaning in, hanging on my every word. Walter finally found his voice. It was hoarse, ragged. Beverly, what is she talking about? He demanded, taking a step away from her, as if she were contagious. She's talking about this, I said, reaching back into my clutch. This was the moment. The checkmate. I pulled out the other documents, a neat little stack clipped together. The top page was a copy of her medical records. The private investigator I hired was very thorough, I said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. He found your medical records. The ones from the fertility clinic you went to 3 months ago. You remember, right after Walter and I announced our engagement? The treatments you had with your ex-boyfriend, Clayton. The one you told everyone you were finished with. Whispers erupted around the room, growing from a murmur to a loud buzz of scandalized chatter. I saw my mother sway, grabbing onto my father's arm for support. Her carefully constructed world, her perfect family image, was being publicly dismantled. The timing is really something, isn't it? I continued, my voice cutting through the noise. You get pregnant with your ex-boyfriend's baby, and since he conveniently left you to deal with it all alone, you looked around for a solution. I paused, letting the meaning sink in before I delivered the final, crushing blow. And you saw my fiancé. The fury on Walter's face was terrifying. He turned on Beverly, his voice rising to a shout. You planned this? You planned all of it? Tears, real ones this time, born of pure panic, welled in Beverly's eyes. It was her usual move, the one that had always worked. "I was desperate," she wailed. "Clayton left, and I was so scared, and I saw how happy you were with Meredith, and I thought. You thought you could steal my fiancé, lie about the baby's father, and have our parents cover for you?" I finished for her, my voice like ice. "And you were right. They did." I turned my gaze on my parents, who stood frozen in horror. "You didn't even question it, did you? You just saw her tears and immediately believed her, like you always do. You were so ready to throw me away for her sob story." "We didn't know," my mother whispered, her voice trembling. "You didn't want to know," I corrected her, the words sharp and final. "You never do. Not when it comes to her." The room had fallen completely silent again. Even Beverly had stopped crying, finally realizing that there was no way out, no one left to rescue her. Walter turned to me, his voice shaky, full of a dawning, sickening understanding. "You knew? All this time, you knew?" "I suspected," I said simply. "Beverly has never been as clever as she thinks she is. And you," I added, looking him up and down with disdain, "have never been very good at keeping secrets. If you're still listening, could you do me a huge favor and like this video, and comment the number 1 down below? That lets me know you've given me a thumbs up, and it tells me you're right here with me on this journey. Your support means the world to me and keeps me going. Just comment the number 1, and then let's get back to the story." Aunt Lorraine, who had been standing silently by the wall like a guardian angel, chose that moment to step forward. Her heels clicked loudly on the polished ballroom floor, each step a declaration. "I think," she said, her voice clear and commanding, "this party is over." That broke the spell. Walter let out a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a roar of fury. Without another word, without even a glance back at the weeping woman who had destroyed his life along with mine, he turned and stormed out of the ballroom. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing the final, violent end of our life together. The crowd, sensing the show was over, began to disperse awkwardly, murmuring amongst themselves, avoiding eye contact with my family. They had gotten their drama, and now they were retreating to a safe distance to dissect it. My parents were left standing in the middle of the emptying room, looking helpless and lost amidst the ruins of their perfect party. My mother was trying to comfort Beverly, who was sobbing hysterically now, but her movements were stiff and uncertain. My father just stood there, his face gray, looking 100 years old. No one looked at me. It was as if I was a ghost, the instrument of their destruction who was now invisible. And that was fine by me. I had said everything I needed to say. Lorraine put a steadying hand on my arm. "Come on, kiddo. Let's go home." We walked out of the country club, leaving the wreckage behind us. The night air felt clean and cool on my skin. As we got into the car, Lorraine turned to me, a proud, fierce smile on her face. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you," she said softly. I thought of her journal, of her lessons on patience and justice, on letting a quiet frost do the work of a loud explosion. "Yes," I agreed, a sense of profound, weary peace settling over me. "I think she would." But as we drove away, leaving the glowing lights of the country club behind, I knew this wasn't really the end. Revealing the truth about the DNA and the medical records was just the beginning. There were more lies to unravel, more consequences to be faced. Beverly had always been the star of our family's dysfunctional show, the one everyone's world revolved around. But now, for the first time in my life, I was in control of the final act. And I was going to make sure everyone got the ending they deserved. The fallout from that night was swift and satisfying. Within days, Beverly's carefully constructed world imploded. Walter, true to his word, was gone. He had his belongings moved out of our old apartment while Beverly was out, leaving only the key on the counter. Her ex-boyfriend, Clayton, the real father, wanted nothing to do with her or the baby when she finally contacted him. He had a new life, a new girlfriend, and he made it clear he saw Beverly's pregnancy as her problem, not his. And my parents, well, they finally had to face the monster they had created. For the first time, Beverly's tears and manipulations didn't work. They were left with a disgraced, pregnant daughter and a web of lies that had been publicly exposed. A few weeks later, my mother found me in the produce section of the grocery store in town. I was calmly picking out apples. She looked terrible, tired and worn down. "Beverly's not eating," she said, her voice a low, pleading whisper. "She won't get out of bed. She needs her sister, Meredith." I didn't look up. I just continued to inspect a Granny Smith, turning it over in my hand. "No," I said calmly. "What she needs is to finally face the truth. Something you never, ever made her do." "We made mistakes," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I see that now. But she's still your sister." I finally stopped and met her gaze. My own eyes were clear and steady. "And I was still your daughter," I said softly. "I was your daughter every single time you chose her over me. Every time you asked me to be the bigger person. Every time you made me pay for her mistakes, literally and figuratively. You don't get to ask me for anything anymore." I placed the apple in my basket and walked away, leaving her standing there by the oranges. The final shard of my old life came from Aunt Lorraine. She had been doing some digging of her own. Over dinner at the cottage one night, she laid it all out. "It's worse than we thought," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "Your father has been paying Beverly's credit card bills for years. But look at these." She pointed to a series of charges. Hotel bills, restaurant tabs, even a charge for a jewelry store. These are all from the months she was seeing Clayton behind everyone's back, while you and Walter were planning your wedding. Your father was funding her secret life. I shouldn't have been surprised, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. They hadn't just suspected. They had known, on some level, that she was lying and sneaking around, and they had paid to make it happen, probably with money that should have gone towards their retirement or a family vacation. They had actively, financially, supported her deception. I thought about all the times I had worked extra hours to help pay for my own college fund while Beverly's expenses were always magically covered. It was clear now. They hadn't just enabled her, they had been her willing accomplices. About a month after the party, I got an unexpected visitor. It was Walter. He was standing on my grandmother's porch, looking exhausted and ashamed. "I'm not here to apologize," he said quickly, not meeting my eye. "I mean, I am sorry, more than you can ever know, but I know it doesn't change anything. I know an apology doesn't fix this." "Then why are you here, Walter?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I used to find endearing. "I'm leaving town. I took that job promotion in Seattle. I needed you to know that you were right. About everything." I just nodded. "Not everything," I said quietly. "I thought you loved me." He flinched, and that single, sharp movement told me everything I needed to know. He looked at me then, his eyes full of regret. "I'm sorry, Meredith," he whispered, and then he turned and walked away. I watched him go until his car disappeared down the long gravel drive, and I felt nothing but the quiet peace of a chapter finally, definitively, closing. A few weeks after Walter's visit, Aunt Lorraine showed up at the cottage with a large, official-looking briefcase. Her face was alight with a kind of excited energy I hadn't seen in a long time. "You are not going to believe this," she said, spreading a stack of legal papers across my kitchen table. "I finally got access to Mother's safety deposit box at the bank. And it looks like your grandmother left you a lot more than just this cottage." The documents revealed a trust fund that my grandmother had secretly established in my name years ago. It was a substantial amount, carefully invested, with a clear stipulation that it was meant to help with my wedding and the purchase of a future home. She had known, even back then, that I might need a way to build a life independent of my parents' influence. It was an act of foresight and love so profound it brought tears to my eyes. But that wasn't all. My grandmother, the meticulous record keeper she always was, had kept copies of every single check she had ever written to my parents to cover Beverly's emergencies over the years. The crashed car, the credit card debt, even a request for money to cover a specialized college course that Beverly had promptly dropped out of. It was all there, documented, dated, and totaled. The sum was staggering. It was a detailed financial history of their favoritism. "There's one more thing," Aunt Lorraine said, her voice softening. She handed me a pale blue envelope, my name written on the front in my grandmother's elegant, familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was short, but every word carried the weight of her love and wisdom. "My dearest Meredith," it began. "If you are reading this, I can only assume that they have finally pushed you too far. I am so sorry I am not there to help you through it, but I left you something that can. Use these documents wisely. Remember that you are stronger than you know, and you deserve a life of happiness, not one spent cleaning up the messes of others. Sometimes, the best way to win a fight is not to seek revenge, but to simply let people face the unvarnished, expensive consequences of their own actions. All my love, Grandma." I held the letter to my chest, the tears I had refused to shed that night at the party finally falling, hot and cleansing. They weren't tears of sadness, but of gratitude. My grandmother had seen me. She had understood me in a way my own parents never had. And even after she was gone, she had found a way to give me the ultimate gift, the tools for my own liberation. She had left me an inheritance, not just of money, but of strength. This was her final lesson, and her greatest one. I followed my grandmother's advice to the letter. I didn't storm into my parents' house, waving the documents in their faces. I didn't scream or shout. That would have been their kind of drama, not mine. Instead, I gave the financial records to my lawyer, Ms. Albright. She drew up a simple, formal letter and sent copies to my parents. The letter didn't make demands. It didn't threaten a lawsuit for the repayment of the loan from my grandmother's estate. It simply stated the facts, laying out the documented history of the money they had taken, with a polite, professional note at the bottom: "This information is provided for your records." The quiet frost had begun to creep in. The silence that followed was more damning than any argument could have been. 2 days after they received the letter, I got a call from Aunt Lorraine. Beverly had moved back home. With her perfect future in ruins, no fiancé, and no money of her own, she had nowhere else to go. My parents were now saddled with her, financially and emotionally, with no escape hatch. The truth of their choices had come home to roost. A week later, my father called. His voice, usually so full of bluster and authority, was heavy with defeat. It was the voice of a man who knew he had lost. "Meredith," he said, his voice raspy. "We received the documents from your lawyer. What do you want from us?" He was expecting a demand. A bill. A confrontation. He was waiting for me to name my price for the pain they had caused. I stood on the porch of the cottage, looking out at the calm, sparkling lake. The air was clean, the sun was warm, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely free. "Nothing," I said, and the honesty of the word was breathtaking. "I don't want anything from you anymore." And I meant it. That was the real victory. It wasn't about punishing them or getting some kind of financial revenge. It wasn't about making them pay me back. It was about realizing that I didn't need anything from them, not their approval, not their money, not even their love. The price of their acceptance was my own happiness, and I was no longer willing to pay it. I was freeing myself. I hung up the phone, and with that simple click, I cut the final toxic cord that had bound me to them for my entire life. 6 months passed. 6 quiet, peaceful, transformative months. Using the power of attorney my grandmother had wisely left me, I had my lawyer oversee the sale of my legal share of the family property, which included the main house my parents lived in. Beverly and my parents tried to fight it, of course, claiming emotional distress, but the legal documents were airtight. They were forced to buy me out, a process that, I heard through my aunt, nearly wiped out their savings. With the money from the sale and the trust fund from my grandmother, I did something I had always dreamed of but never thought possible. I bought a small, charming old building in the little town near the cottage and turned it into a bookstore. It had always been my secret passion, a dream I had tucked away because my parents had insisted it wasn't a practical career. Aunt Lorraine helped me with the renovations. We spent weeks painting walls, building shelves, and sorting through boxes of books. On opening day, the store was filled with the scent of old paper and fresh coffee, and sunlight streamed through the big front window. Lorraine gave me a gift. It was my grandmother's journal, which she had had rebound in beautiful, soft leather. Inside the front cover, she had inscribed a new message, for Meredith, who learned that the quietest voice often speaks the loudest truth. I keep the DNA test results in a locked drawer in my desk at the store. Not as a trophy or a reminder of the betrayal, but as a reminder of my own strength. It's proof that I could face the worst and not only survive, but build something better from the ashes. I hear things sometimes. Beverly had her baby, a little boy. She still lives with our parents. Their lives are a constant, low-grade drama that no longer touches me. It's like hearing about the weather in a distant country. Last week, a wedding invitation arrived in the mail. It was from Walter. He's marrying someone new in Seattle. I wrote "Return to sender" on the envelope and put it back in the mailbox without ever opening it. Some chapters are just better left closed. Now, as I sit here on the cottage porch, the same porch where my story of heartbreak began, I watch the sunset paint the lake in shades of orange and pink, and I finally understand what my grandmother meant about victory. It's not about winning the fight or destroying those who hurt you. It's about having the courage to choose your own path forward, to build a life so full of peace and quiet joy that the noise of the past simply fades away. Beverly's betrayal didn't break me. It set me free. And that, I've come to realize, is the best revenge of all. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. If any part of this resonated with you, if you've ever had to find your own strength in a difficult situation, please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you could, please like this video and subscribe. It really does help. I'll see you all next time.